Any of you that have written, when you've written and published articles, you've gotten a license agreement. Most of those journals have probably asked you to sign away your copyright or your rights to that work for them to publish it. Now some open access journals and some more, actually smaller journals are going to be a little more lenient and still allow you to retain copyright as long as they can write a first publication. And I don't want to get too far down the bunny trails of the exciting topic of license agreements, but I'm happy to talk afterwards if you'd like. But so one example, just because we can't always invoke fair use just to do what we want, and just because we have an author or content creator's approval or permission does not mean they're the ones that continue to own the work and give us permission. If I can move for an example outside of academic and textbook publishing, in the musical world, there are individuals who are known as sample trolls. People who buy catalogs of copyrighted works. So they own the copyright to a bunch of works. George Clinton from George Clinton, the P-Funk All-Stars, does not own any of the rights to his works. Sample trolls do. And so these are people that have software, they listen to music that comes out on the radio and on the charts, and when they hear a section of a song that sounds similar to a section of a song from George Clinton's works, they contact and sue. So they're just trolling artists that have created new music, and they're trying to capitalize and profit off using copyright. I can't remember what I was going to connect that with, copyright. I really just wanted to drop George Clinton. Okay, so the 4 fair use factors, and we're going to just go over these real quickly. And the checklist I gave you, and you can follow that link later, there's a nice little chart that says, does it meet this criteria, does it meet this criteria, does it meet this criteria? So the first one, the purpose and character of our use. Are we using this for teaching? In most of our cases, we're going to say yes. Is it for research or scholarship? In most of those cases, we're going to say yes, it is. Is it for a nonprofit, or are we a for-profit institution? We're nonprofit. So on this first one, we're checking these positives that it does qualify for fair use. So we're good. Is it a parody? That would also be fine. What type of work is it that that is copyrighted, that we are wanting to use? Is it a published work? That favors fair use. If it's unpublished, that does not. We would probably need to seek permission of the rights holder. Is it factual or nonfiction? Favors fair use. If it's more of a creative work, does not favor fair use. We need to probably seek the rights holder. How much, what portion, how much of the work are we using? This is something, every now and then a faculty member says, well, there's the 10 pages rule or 10% rule. Come up with some arbitrary figure that they've heard somewhere.
Miles.
Pardon?
50 miles.
50 miles. That says how much of a word you can use, or how much of a sound clip or video or audio recording you could use. In the past, some have given best practices or rules of thumb. There really aren't any consistent rules of thumb on how much you can use. So it's really kind of vague, but are you using a small quantity? Then it favors fair use. What does small quantity mean? I don't know. So it's kind of up to you to answer that question. Are you using a large portion of the work? Is it a poem? You know, if it's a creative published poem, if you're wanting to use the whole, maybe it's a short poem and you're using the whole poem, maybe you're only using 5 lines and that's half the poem. It's probably more of a large quantity than a small quantity. That's just my opinion. You are free to make these judgments on your own. Is the portion that you're using, is that central or the heart of the work? If that's true, then it's probably not favoring fair use, and you need to seek out copyright permissions or the rights holder. And finally, the effect on the market. What effect does your use of the market or would have on the market? An example, if I'm teaching a course online and I want students to read this book, well, I'm just going to upload the entire PDF, scan my print book, upload it to Blackboard, and then all of my students can read it online. Does that have an effect on the market for that book? Gary's shaking his head yes, thank you, Gary. It does have a market because maybe I had 20 students in that class. That means 20 copies of that book could have been purchased, so it does affect the market. Now somebody might say, well, what if it's an out-of-print book? Does that matter? Not really. Is it public domain? Then you're okay. But if it's an out-of-print book, someone still owns the rights to that book. And you can work through the Copyright Clearance Center, copyright.com, and obtaining permissions or finding out who the copyright holder is in that book. Sometimes when it comes to, well, I can't find the copyright holder, so that means that I have permission to use this work. Not necessarily true. Just because you can't find them or you made an attempt to find the copyright holder doesn't mean you have permission or that you cannot be then later on sued for violation of copyright. A couple other things on effect. How many copies did you make? There is kind of a rule of thumb in face-to-face classes that, well, if I'm reading an article in the New York Times, whether it's in print or online, and it's very relevant to our class discussion, I'm going to print that article off and pass it out in my class. Copyright, fair use, and the Teach Act said, well, that's okay. That's fine, you can do that. What does that mean for online courses? It's a little less clear if that's okay. But even for face-to-face courses, well, if I like that article and I want to use that New York Times article in subsequent classes, well, it's kind of a one-time thing. There's what we call the spontaneity clause or spontaneity rule. Well, that's a spontaneous thing that you're using in classes. But if it's something that you're going to premeditated use the following semester, well, you have time to plan to seek permissions or copyright or pay for royalties to use that work. Okay, so that's kind of a quick overview of the fair use factors. Last thing I'll say before I take any questions on copyright or anything else on OER or eBooks, anytime you can link to content is always better than uploading, hosting, or altering the content in any way. So if I can link, and I said earlier, linking to content through our library ebook databases, we've licensed that content. That supersedes copyright. Any articles you find in a research database through our library, you can link to that content. We've licensed that content. It supersedes copyright. A video, do I want to rip this video from someone's site and then upload it and put it into Blackboard? I would advise you to link to that video online. Maybe you found an article on Google Scholar. It looks like some faculty member has just posted it on, knowingly or unknowingly, to their faculty webpage on their university website. Link to that article, let the student print it, save that PDF if they want to. Let's not upload it ourselves. I remember in grad school, some of you probably remember going to the getting course packs printed in like a printing office on campus somewhere. And I remember going to get a course pack printed, and the printing business, they had us come around to the copy machines and push the copy button ourselves. Why did they do this? Because they didn't want any liability. The faculty member of the department sent this course pack over, and they were supposed to have signed away that they cleared copyright restrictions and permissions, but the printer wants no liability there. So it's a completely academic, nonprofit transaction. But if the for-profit printer, which is servicing and printing these course packs, if they make the prints, then they are involved in that transaction, potentially liable for violating fair use or copyright. So I'll stop there and answer any questions. And before you ask any questions, this is what every copyright person says when I've been at workshops and presentations. They say, now, this is not legal advice, and what might be applicable for me might not be applicable for you. So take all of this with a grain of salt. So
maybe this is like, it just betrays my ignorance of a lot of stuff, but like, if what I heard you say about ebooks and stuff, most ebooks aren't like looked at on Kindle, it's just too hard to do, to like download, or from a library or whatever. They're just kind of looked at for academic resources, kind of thumbing through and stuff like that. Then why purchase them for a library? Why not just upload links to like Google Books or Google Scholar if that's what we're just looking for anyway? Just search those.
Yeah, no, and that's I was talking about my use with I wasn't saying research with Amazon Kindle books. I was talking about my use with Kindle books is more so towards leisure reading. But that is, I think your point is a good one. That's why we've moved more towards what the demand-driven acquisition model with ebooks, where our librarians are collecting and selecting, or if faculty are requesting books, if we have that available as an ebook, we are adding it electronically to our library catalog. Students wouldn't know that we don't already own it. Faculty don't know we don't own those books. It's not until you click on them. So that actually does save us from purchasing content that is not being used or is only being used that way. We're actually working to integrate some Google Preview APIs into our library catalog and our search tools. So even if we don't have that book, when students search our Search Everything tool, they will be able to see the Google Preview if available right there within the catalog record for that book. Does that answer your question? Sorry. Roger.
YouTube, if I understood right, as far as like providing links, I can put a link on Blackboard for send my students to watch something. What about downloading it myself? I often get nervous about streaming going down during class.
Yeah.
So I use YouTube Downloader, have my own file that I play. Am I playing fair use there, or am I getting
Fire.
iffy?
You know, they
A
seem
former faculty member.
Get over the
YouTube video.
Well, I'm sorry, what was that? Oh. I would not download the file and upload it into a course shell.
Right.
I would think if it's in a face-to-face class, I would think that's okay. You notice I'm speaking in ambiguities and being very vague and not committal with my response. But I would think that would be okay because you're not taking, and you're still pulling from that source. You're not altering the work. You're still storing it, but you're storing it for personal use in face-to-face class. Now with an online class, I see Gary raising his hand. An online class, it's a little different. I would think even, not just linking to YouTube in a course shell, but even embedding would be okay because you're pulling from that source. If you're embedding, they go to click play, it's playing from YouTube. It's just embedded within that page, which is different than posting.
But if it's not very intellectual, then I don't have to worry about it anyway.
Yeah, if it's the Gangnam Style video, it's fine. Yeah.
So what about stuff that's like, let's say that some people have like a sports podcast or something like that, and most podcasts, they're not copyrighted, they're not, nobody's trying to protect that stuff. So can you just download those things and upload them to your Blackboard or something like that?
Because most podcasts are free. Right? I would say free podcast, you're downloading them into iTunes, but in most cases you still can link to stream those free podcasts. If I was creating an online course shell, I would link to free podcasts wherever possible.
Rather than download it and upload it.
Yeah.
Yes,
It
might, if you go through the fair use checklist, it might still be, you might favor fair use, in those 4 factors, if you can, I didn't say this earlier, if you're only be able to check off one of those that favors fair use, then it's probably iffy. 2, you're still, if you could check off 3 of those on fair use, you're probably okay, or you can at least make a defensible argument. This favors fair use, I'm okay here. So I would say you're probably more likely to favor fair use if you just link to those podcasts. You still might be able to favor fair use depending, now if it's a podcast you purchased, and then you upload it, I would be a little more cautious about doing that.
What if you were making this sports podcast?
Are we still talking about the sports podcast?
Apparently.
Do you have a specific one in mind?
No.
Okay.
And you wanted to use a copyrighted song in it, but the podcast wasn't charging anyone, and you were only using a few bars of the music. So what? I don't think that's and even NPR can only use a certain number of bars,
Yeah,
right?
because
What one of those are they breaking?
They're the purpose and character of the fair use. Is it a small quantity? That's the portion. Sorry, the bullet 3. So the question you're asking is a small quantity, and are you providing news reporting, which NPR is? So if they're talking about Beyonce's latest single, they could play a clip of it and then they comment on it. Could they play the whole song? No. And how much of it they're playing? What does a small quantity mean? I'm sure NPR has a rule of thumb for what they mean as a small quantity is to play of a song. And then the other is it for profit or non-profit? The other is the nature of your use. The number 1, is it a parody? If the sports podcast you're mentioning is parodying the work, then it might be okay. If they're doing news reporting, it might be okay. If it's a small quantity, it might be okay. We might have just checked off 3 and we could say, oh, this favors fair use.
You can just sing the songs rather than.
Actually, wouldn't that be an issue as well?
It is.
Public performance, sometimes when we buy, if you're so off key that the melody isn't changed, did you not change the work itself, even though you're using the same words? I don't know. But sometimes we purchase institutional copies of DVDs for the library, and they're $300 for an educational documentary. That documentary is 20 minutes. We don't purchase very many of those at all. But we're purchasing public performance rights because we have that gives us permission to play that publicly here in the RCF for hundreds of students to come and watch it for free. It doesn't give us public performance rights to charge for that film, but it does give us permission. Now, if we have copies of maybe a popular film that we paid $20 for on Amazon, we don't have public performance rights for that. So we couldn't show that. We would have to seek further permissions and we'll pay royalties to show that on campus or to show in an online course shell. You can pay for permissions through Copyright Clearance Center or through publishers to show videos and content in a course shell, but they want more details. How many students, how much, how often we use it, just one semester or multiple semesters, and they give you different pricing for that.
So, I too was at one of these schools where we had a copy, it's called the copy map at Purdue.
A copy what?
The copy map, it was called at Purdue. You went there and you got your course packets, which were filled with copyrighted material, articles that professors put together. We didn't have to push the button, you just had to give them the money. So I don't know if you're on
The money was the button.
Right, that's right. It seems like this is a very much a gray area, even in saying like probably 3, right? So this is in some ways how one avoids litigation that may or may not be brought against you, right? As a library director, are you less concerned for an institution like ours than someone who's perhaps at an institution like a Research One institution?
Oh yeah, because we're small fish.
fries,
We're small
right.
fish.
But
There's
what
much
about
larger
how much I
fries.
can steal is what I'm asking.
There's much, but when Napster, most of us remember Napster was very big. There's piracy going on Napster. BitTorrent still survives somehow, and that's some of you have probably used it. But when Napster was big, a lot of the record labels were sending out issues of cease and desist letters
The
to
RIA,
institutions.
I had a student who had to pay over $6,000 for me taking to court.
Spring
It was at
Arbor,
Purdue.
Spring Arbor, we were not a small enough fish that we were not exempt from that. We were sent letters for students that were high use, and they said, stop these students from doing this, or we will prosecute you unless you give them over, and then we'll prosecute them. So I think larger universities were giving over student
They're
names.
just turning it over on them.
They're just turning, oh yeah, right away.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are probably a small fish. Georgia State, which is a much larger institution, how many students? 5 publishers got together and sued them in 2012. It was before that, but the ruling was in 2012, for their use of e-reserves, where their library was placing a great deal of required course texts on e-reserve, and they have tens of thousands of students. So these publishers were saying, this is hurting our market. This is hurting our market. And they sued them. Georgia State actually won on most of the complaints brought against them. But so the publishers are going after those larger institutions to set precedent, knowing that smaller institutions like ours would follow suit. Then there's the whole ethical of, well, just because we don't like the law doesn't mean we shouldn't follow it. Our ethicist philosophy professor just left. He could have weighed in on the ethics.
We're okay.
Yeah, we're okay. He was our moral compass. We're fine. But there's a question of, well, we probably could do this because we are small potatoes.
Well, I have a textbook that I use in history of the English language, and when I first began using that book, it was $50. And then I think Cengage bought the copyright, and now it's over $200 for this book. Right, and so for me, there's an ethical problem with the publishers who are crooks, and so
Agreed.
there's a feeling of it's not like I want to steal from them, and I don't, but there are.
But there's, and publishers are notorious for sending out, giving a new update almost every year.
Yeah.
Almost every year.
Yes.
Well, could we as faculty, as instructors, could we just choose, I'm going to stick with the 2010 version. There's enough printed copies on the used market. It's not a large class. It's, 15 students once a year, we should be able to get 15 copies. They should be able to get copies of this 2010 version. And that depends on the subject matter to some degree. But the challenge with more and more publishers moving to e-content, and they're providing access. Well, with the book, you get content to the companion site. I'm looking at Robert Woods, who managed. You still manage the companion site for your communication and media ethics book?
Took it down this year.
Oh, you just took it down this year.
Put it up in fall.
So providing companion sites, it's e-textbook publishers are just providing e-textbooks only, because then they can control there's no resellers market for ebooks. There's no resellers market for digital music that you've purchased on iTunes. There's companies that have tried to create a digital resellers market for music and media that we've purchased online through iTunes or Amazon, and have been sued and have had to take their sites and their resellers market down while litigation is, I still think, proceeding. So yeah, what that I mean is more and more textbooks are e-book textbooks. That really hurts the resellers market. So publishers are able to publish every year. Students have to buy the new version every year, and there's no secondary market. Bryce?
So rather than uploading a PDF of a scanned article or a PDF of a textbook, you would encourage faculty to find a link to it through your library?
If we have it, find a link to it through our library. If you can find it anywhere online and link to it, you're more likely to favor fair use in that case. Barring those examples and permissions from you'd probably seek out copyright permissions if you're wanting to upload something that you have only in print or is not available that you can send students to online.
If something is not available through our library or is no longer available through the library, are you willing to work with the faculty to find a comparable resource or direct them to where they can find it elsewhere?
Yeah, we tried, I think we've tried to do this with nursing as best we can. Sometimes there's articles that faculty want to use or books you want to use, and just due to the cost of that database or cost of those journals, we can't afford to provide access to that. And so we can try to find a suitable place, but there's some content you're not going to find a suitable replacement because it's a significant study in your field. If you want, your students need to read that for that graduate level course or that undergrad course in your discipline.
Can they put the financial burden on the students to buy a copy of the article through Springer, perhaps?
Through, as you said,
Springer or-
Springer, like the publishing, yeah, or through Tree of Life. I think Tree of Life does course packs or will do course packs. Bruce, you've done course packs through Ginkgo Tree.
Yeah, we use Ginkgo Tree.
So you can put the onus on the student, by setting up a course pack through a provider like Ginkgo Tree to provide that. And I think they provide that at cost for whatever permissions they have to obtain for copyright and printing. Is that
Work through
correct?
Copyright issues with you.
Yeah, that's more accurate. They work through
Okay.
issues.
Yeah.
And they're pretty good. But that's what that's their model of business.
Thanks for coming. I appreciate your attention for an exciting and riveting topic.